First, I would like to express deep gratitude to all of you who prepared for and support us along the years. You all have been to us brothers and sisters in the real sense for which we praise God. I would like first to have a brief history of our churches in the Middle East, especially in Syria and Lebanon. The Reformed faith first took root in the Middle East in the early 19th century. Most of the region was then part of the Turkish Empire or Ottoman Empire, and the preceding 500 years have been a time of isolation from intellectual and spiritual movements in the rest of the world. Then came a time when doors were being opened to influences from the West on all aspects of life. In the Arab-speaking parts of the empire, there was a movement to re-establish the intellectual life which had once made the Middle East a center of scientific, medical, and philosophical activity. This intellectual renaissance was accompanied by a new openness to a great variety and freedom in religious expression. The great majority of the people of the Middle East were and are followers of the Muslim faith, first proclaimed by Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century. Out there has always been a significant minority of Christians in several ethnic and linguistic communities: Greek Orthodox, the earlier ethnic and the earlier Arabic-speaking descendants, and the first Christian of Antioch, as we read and heard from Acts 11:26. Syrian Orthodox, with a liturgy in the Old Syriac language, again to Aramaic spoken by Jesus and his disciples. Maronites, another Syriac liturgy community found mostly in the mountains of Lebanon, and they are originally from Aleppo. Saint Maron came from Aleppo to Mount Lebanon after some clashes and fighting between the Maronites and the Orthodox. Coptic Orthodox in Egypt, Armenian Orthodox originally in Turkey, but they spread in Syria and Lebanon and in other Palestine and in other countries. Now, the Church of the Middle East, sometimes known as Assyrian or Chaldean, also scattered here and there in the region. Even before the 19th century, some of these Maronites and groups from the several Orthodox bodies had come into full communion with the Roman Catholic Church. The intellectual awakening in the East came at a time when Europe and North American Protestants had become conscious of their need to engage in witness and service in other parts of the world. Beginning in 1819, a number of missionary representatives came to various parts of the Middle East. In subsequent years, responsibilities were divided among a number of denominational bodies. Congregationalists concentrated their efforts among Armenian and Turkish-speaking people. Anglicans were working in Palestine. Presbyterians, of course, also the Lutherans came after the Anglicans to Palestine. Presbyterians and Reformed Presbyterians from the British Isles and North America came first to what is known Syria and Lebanon, and later carried on work in Egypt. Other Reformed churches had worked in Arabian Gulf. In 1848, when the first church, Presbyterian Church, was organized in Beirut, there were 19 communicant members only in that church. In 1851, a church was organized in Hasbaya, South Lebanon, on the slopes of Mount Haramon, and the following years, a church was founded in Aleppo, in Syria, in northern Syria. In the next few years, churches were established in Syria, city of Homs, in South Lebanon, and Sidon, and Tyre and Marjayun, and in 2 Lebanese mountain villages. In 1870, these churches reported a total of around 300 adult communicant members. I am saying this to say that from the very beginning of the evangelical witness in the Middle East was accompanied by an educational ministry in keeping with Reformed background and proclamation the gospel called for the literate understanding of the school was opened in 1824 and was the first school for teaching girls under the Ottoman Empire. It was in Beirut in 1827. In that time, there was only 7 girls in that school. Now it is known as School of Beirut for girls and boys, and also it's now moved to a southern Beirut in the place called Rabi. Since that time till now, the relationship between the Presbyterian Church, as known as the Synod of Syria and Lebanon, has a relation, and there are many co-workers and representatives from the church from U.S.A. and especially from the north of U.S.A. goes to that area and serving and proclaiming the word of the Lord. It is now over a year and a half that we have been deeply disturbed by the sad events in Syria. Of course, Lebanon passed 15 years of a civil war, and the church also was affected by that war, and especially migrant of the Presbyterians and the Christians mainly to America, to Europe, to other places of the world, but mainly to Brazil and to U.S.A. Some of our churches, the intensity of violence, the huge number of the innocent people killed, the destruction in the major cities where our churches lived and served in peace for centuries, stepped beyond description or even imagination. Reverend Tomeh will talk a little bit in details about what's happening, and we will have time to say about, or we can tell you about our mission as a synod for in these days, in these difficult days in the area, and especially for the Christians in Syria and Lebanon. Some of our churches still unable to meet regularly for worship, like our church in Homs, and these days now in Aleppo also, and in Idlib, and in other places. The Synod has, let me say, that they have around 45 churches, functioning churches, and around 4 centers for serving and health services, or youth meeting groups, conference centers, and others. And there are 7 secondary schools in Lebanon and 2 in Syria. And there are also 4 or 5 elementary schools that is under the supervision of the Synod. So, in all, the churches in Syria and Lebanon was affected very much of last civil war in Lebanon, and now what's happening in Syria and the situation there. No Christian community can escape the fate of the communities among which they live. Thus, all share in the suffering and the struggle for life, and all sense the loss of the basic conditions for normal life. It is guessed that the refugees in neighboring countries number some around 2 million, which they live. Thus, all share, I mean, not all of them, they moved to outside the country. No, most of them displaced from one place to another, and especially the Christians in that area. Let us take an example. Homs, Christians in Homs, they are around 150,000. 80% of them moved to the other part of Syria, which is for the west. That part, it's under the Alawite and the Christian power. So, and the 20%, some of them are still in Homs under pressure and bombarding their houses and their churches and their properties, and some of them left outside Syria to Lebanon, to Jordan, to Europe, to other places, and especially to Europe, the Assyrians and the Syriac people, because they have some relatives in Europe, especially in Sweden and Norway and other Scandinavian countries. So I can tell you a small story. Before 2-3 months, I went to North Syria. It is the place near the border of Turkey and Iraq. It's under now the Kurdish power, or Kurdish party. While I was there, the Christians there, I felt, and they asked us many questions because I was with a group. So, what's the future for us? What's hidden for our future? We, as Christians, we are so afraid in these days to because they came in mind the massacre that happened in Turkey during the war, the First World War, and they were displaced from Turkey to Syria and to Lebanon, and now they are in a fear that where do they go? And I noticed that the Kurdish party is taking over this area, and there are many Syrian and Assyrians are living there. And the airport, there are 2 flights weekly. The airport is still functioning in that area in Qamishli village and Qamishli town. This is in Hasaki, in the area of the Hasaki. So every week there are 2 aircrafts take Christians only to Europe. Those who are planning to immigrate or those who are leaving their country just to see what will happen after. So this will happen weekly. That means more than 20% of the Christians in that area left within these 2-3 months. And still it's the same, which it's going the same. I don't know if they will stop it or not. But this is the only airport in that area still open, and it's the only way that they can move from their villages and their homes to Europe. I think it's enough for me till now. I will let Reverend Tomeh speak about the situation, and also we can share with you other things, other aspects that in mind, and if it helps you to know about our Christians present in the area and in the Middle East.
Thank you all for coming this afternoon, this noon, and I'm glad to see some familiar faces here that I have ministered with in the Middle East for many years. It's good to be here and to have your interest in what's happening. I'm sure on your mind now, like on the minds of many people who are living abroad, Christians who are very much concerned about the Christian presence and witness in the Middle East. What is the role of the church? What is the church doing in all what's happening in the Middle East? What is the church doing in Egypt? And what is the church doing in Syria? Maybe not much about Libya and Yemen or Tunisia, because as you are well aware, there are very little presence of Christians in these countries. But mostly, we are very much concerned about the Christian presence. It's a big challenge to continue. We have the, I would say, the hope and the faith to continue this Christian presence with the support of the international community, especially our Christian sisters and brothers all around the world. Many people write and ask, where is the church in all this? What is the church is trying to do? And here I want to address this very shortly and maybe give you some chance to ask some questions. From the beginning of the uprising, or if you want to call it the uprising, we don't really call it Arabic Spring or Arab Spring because we don't feel it is a spring. We feel it is a dark winter that is going through all over the Middle East. You may agree or disagree with me, that's really up to you. But this is our feeling there. This movement, which started in a way by innocent people who are really seeking reformation and seeking freedom and seeking liberty in a way or another, turned to be a violence, a terrorist acts in many ways. And I will speak mainly here about Syria. When the demonstration in March of 2011 started, there were good, innocent people, young people, Christians and Muslims, demonstrating, seeking and calling for reformation, calling for dealing with the corruption that is taking place in the government for many years, seeking more freedom of the press, more freedom of the opinion, more freedom of the speech. And with less than few weeks, these demonstrators were penetrated by armed people, and all of a sudden, shooting started, killing started. The reaction from the government or from the official army was harsh and tried to put down those people who were shooting at nowhere but just to create a problem and spread. As you are all aware, since that time, there was all the time an action in one place and reaction in another place, and you are probably aware of all these changes that took place. And from the beginning, the church leaders, and here I want to name, and if you are not, if you haven't received this statement, especially people who are from the churches here, the three patriarchs in Syria, the Greek Orthodox, the Syriac Orthodox, and the Greek Catholic, with other churches leaders, have made a statement and called for the stop of the violence, for dialogue, and called the government to deal with these issues in a peaceful way, calling for reformation and calling for a way to deal with what's happening, but in a peaceful way. And always the churches made it very clear. We need reformation. We need a transition, a period of transition that people would understand what's happening, but not in violence and not in the killing that we have noticed. That was the position of the church from the beginning. And then all of a sudden, the churches were faced with massive displaced people within the country first, from the area where the fighting started, and the churches tried to deal with this, again with the help of the international community. And when Christians started moving, the church was more involved, because now every pastor or priest or bishop in his own town is faced with his people leaving, and started mostly big huge of Christians moving from the city of Homs, as Reverend Fadi have mentioned this, and the Christians were put in a very difficult situations. And so the churches responded right away, continued to call for peace and for ceasefire and for dialogue, national dialogue. And then, of course, as you are aware, the government have made an amendment to the Constitution, and basic amendments were made in the Constitution, mainly lifting up the emergency law, which was in the country for 40 years, and then also dealing with the Article 8, which calls that the Ba'ath Party is not the source of legislation, but there were some other also that were. Now, many people said this is good, many people said no, this is not enough, we need a change of a regime. So we were talking about a reformation, now we're talking about the change of the regime, and the violence spread everywhere, and which made it a big challenge for the people of Syria to maintain their presence there, and many of them have been, got crossed into fire. Late last year, you remember all the incidents in Syria, which actually broke the big fight, when this area near Homs, Baba Amro, was a safe haven, if you want to say, for all the radical groups that came from around Syria, and they were fighting from there, and the Syrian government seized that area and cleaned it up, destroyed it, you can say, and get rid of these people. Many of these radical groups, Muslim radical groups, went inside the city of Homs and Hamidiyya in particular, and Bistan al-Diwan, and all those areas where Christians lived. And when they came in, the Christians became very scared, because they thought now the government will follow them and will kill everybody there, like what happened in the Baba Amro. So they left their homes. They hardly took anything with them. Maybe their IDs even were not with them, because they were scared, because they have seen what happened in the beginning in some places. And so this militant group occupied the houses of the Christians, including the churches, and about 7-8 churches in that area were directly or indirectly, whether purposely or not purposely, hit, burned, destruction, roofs, furniture, etc. We don't know exactly who did this or how it happened, but we know that this is the result, what happened. So these displaced Christians left. Now other people in other area also, Muslim, were displaced because of the fighting in the different areas. And it became later on, in that last year and early this year, that there are many non-Syrian involved in the fighting with a lot of weapons and a lot of instrument and equipment for communication, and groups from outside have been penetrated into Syria, and the violence started everywhere. Now, it's uncontrolled. Unfortunately, we continue to have hope, but we know that it is very difficult, very complicated. We cannot even compare it with any other situation in the Arab countries. We look as Christians to what happened in Iraq. You are all aware in 2003 with the American invasion to Iraq, and only like a year later in 2004, churches were destroyed, Christians were kidnapped and killed. Neighborhood by itself, all in an area, in Baghdad itself or in other places, people had to move out because they were threatened with brochures around their front door: leave, become a Muslim, pay tax, or be killed. And you all probably are aware in what happened in Iraq, starting from 2004, the spread of violence, and especially against Christians. And for the first time in the history of Iraq, Christians were targeted directly, whether for the sake of money or whether to make Iraq as an Islamic state, as the Qaeda-affiliated groups call it to, or to fight the American. The reasons were many. But the basic reason that about 1 million Christian Iraqi had to leave their countries since that time. And they are now, some of them made it okay to United States, Europe, other places, and some of them are stuck, and especially in Syria. Syria accommodated 1.5 million Iraqi refugees until now. Many of them are trying to go back because it's maybe safer in Iraq. I don't know. Today we heard that a Chaldean church in Kirkuk, the largest one, headed by Bishop Sako, was bombed. A big bomb was put at the steps at the entrance of the church, maybe as a reaction for the movie that you have heard about and the demonstration. And so people, Christians in particular here, I want to say, in the Middle East, they cannot remove the picture of Iraq from their minds as they see what's happening in Syria. They are fearful for their lives, and especially we see that the development is becoming a sectarian war. You know, the Alawites, who have been in control of the government in Syria for 40 years, now are obvious, they are scared and fearful because they are going to lose their power. The Sunnis also are very fearful and scared because they cannot go back maybe to their homes and stop fighting, because they say if the regime will win, this will destroy us again. And other minority groups are the same. So everybody is fearful about the situation. In particular, I would say the Christians in Syria at this time, immigration is there, but many of them are reluctant. Some did leave because they had maybe families, relatives outside, and they could make it easily. But some of them are very much reluctant to leave. Even to Lebanon, we have very, very few Christians who came to Lebanon. Probably those who are well-to-do and have already homes and apartments in Lebanon. But many of them were displaced inside the country. And the same with some Muslim or some other minority groups. But this is the kind of situation that people are there. There is no regular organized services to help these displaced people. The Syrian Red Crescent is trying to, with some other organizations that recently have been allowed to come into Syria to help these people. But we know that we have over 1.5 million displaced person inside Syria, and over 1 million maybe outside Syria, in Jordan, in Turkey, in Lebanon, and in Iraq. We know that there is a camp that is set in Iraq, another one in Jordan, and another one in Turkey, but not in Lebanon. Lebanon, until today, refused to set a camp for the Syrian because they are already suffering from the Palestinian refugees who are living in these camps for the last 60 years, and also some of the Iraqi. So many people don't have a place to go in Lebanon. They're still living either in schools, and the school will open soon, so they have to move out of the school, some deserted building, and some of them maybe are able to rent some mountain homes, you know, in the mountain of Lebanon, and this is the kind of situation. What is the solution? We believe the only solution is national dialogue. And Christians in many ways are involved in this local dialogues. The government initiated a ministry to bring about dialogue among the different groups, and they are going from one place to another, and many of the Christians are involved internally in this dialogue that is taking place. It's maybe not moving as fast as we hope to solve the problem and bring about reconciliation. We know the people, the oppositions, the armed groups, especially the non-Syrian armed group, are not in this dialogue, and they don't want to be in that dialogue. We know that some of the opposition that are in Turkey or other places are not involved in the dialogue, and maybe the dialogue is not complete and would take time maybe to be complete. But this is the kind of situation. The only hope for the Syrian people is that dialogue will take place. And we know maybe this will take time, but we have no other option at this time, because the Syrian army is still strong and still supporting the regime, and as the way we see things, they're not going to give up that easy. And we know also the opposition is being given a lot of support and arm from countries outside, including the United States. And we were actually meeting with some of the United Nations missions last week about this, and we have heard this clearly from some of the European countries, and that money is being given in many ways, maybe not armed directly, but a lot of money have been given. And some countries, of course, we know that they are providing arms for the opposition. So both, and we have actually the UK mission person, we said, we wish that you can put pressure on both. I mean, you cannot put pressure maybe on the Syrian because they will not listen to you, but if you can put pressure on the opposition to stop the fighting, and you agree with your Russian friends here at the United Nations that they will put some pressure on Syria, or you both agree no arm to anybody, no assistance to anybody, and force somehow pressure all these two parties to come to dialogue. And we hope that our message last week, which was arranged to visit these missions by the Presbyterian United Nations office here, will bring some fruit. But we are always in prayer. We are asking you to be with us in prayer, that may God interfere in his own ways. And we all know, maybe here as a pastor, I would say, the prophet Isaiah, he said, my ways, talking about God, not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. So we don't know. We are very much frustrated. People in the area are very much frustrated, are losing hope. But the only way, we believe in God of miracles, and we pray that you will pray also with us that a solution will come to an end soon. Thank you very much.